This mini-lecture will cover the remainder of the material on the formation of the diaphragm, which due to time constraints we weren't able to get to. The thoracoabdominal diaphragm forms a separation between the pleural cavity and the abdominal cavity. It is also a very important muscular component involved in breathing. When the diaphragm moves down, the volume of the lungs increases, and as a result, the internal pressure decreases. Because of the negative air pressure produced, air enters the lungs. Thus, the inspiration of air is an automatic process initiated by the diaphragm. The diaphragm arises from the fusion of several different elements. These are the septum transversum, the pleuroperitoneal membranes, and the esophageal mesentery. This fusion is completed by approximately the end of the 6th week. After this time, muscular ingrowth from the lateral body wall adds a fourth component to the developing diaphragm. This figure is color-coded to show the various progenitor tissues of the diaphragm and their fates. The light pink color is a central tendon of the diaphragm and is derived from the septum transversum. The pleuroperitoneal folds grow in and fuse with the septum transversum and the dorsal esophageal mesentery. This fusion interrupts the pericardioperitoneal canals, thus separating the pericardial cavity and the peritoneal cavity by forming a barrier between the two. Later, after fusion has occurred, ingrowth from the muscles of the lateral body wall begins. By the time of birth, these muscles form a large percentage of the composition of the diaphragm and help contribute to its muscular control. The motor control of the diaphragm is established by the phrenic nerves. The phrenic nerves arise from the 3rd through 5th cervical somites. In addition to motor innervation, the phrenic nerves also provide sensory innervation to both the upper and undersides of the diaphragm. Figure 9.9 shows the descent of the diaphragm. Because the embryo is growing and folding all around the septum transversum, it looks, in a relative sense, like the developing diaphragm is descending. In the first part of this figure, we see the position of the future diaphragm at 24 days post-conception. It's located at about the same level as the 3rd through 5th cervical somites. By day 41, in the second part of the figure, the diaphragm has elongated and is now at the level of the thoracic somites. By day 52, it is elongated even further. The ventral end of the diaphragm lies at the same level as the first thoracic somite, while the dorsal end lies down by the first lumbar somite. As we have seen already throughout this course, and as we will continue to see, whenever proper development requires cooperation, communication, and migration of various embryonic tissues, there exists the possibility for errors. With the development of the diaphragm, the most common of these birth defects is called congenital diaphragmatic hernia, abbreviated CDH. CDH is a congenital defect of the posterior-lateral section of the diaphragm. Posterior-lateral accurately describes the position of the defect. Posterior, towards the dorsal side of the diaphragm, and lateral, off to one side of the diaphragm. Part B of this diagram shows the position of the diaphragmatic hernia. Posterior towards the back, and lateral from the midline. and this white spot here is the hole in the diaphragm. This type of defect can occur on either the right or left side of the diaphragm. However, in 85 to 90% of cases of CDH, the defect is on the left side rather than the right side. The pleuroperitoneal membrane normally fuses with the developing diaphragm by the end of the 6th week. When this large hole exists in the diaphragm, the contents of the peritoneal cavity, normally the intestines, can extrude into the thoracic cavity, as we see in the first part of the figure. This exerts pressure on the thoracic organs, especially the ipsilateral lung and the heart, but the contralateral lung is also affected. Most babies that die of CDH die because of lung hypoplasia, or the underdevelopment of lung tissue. The next slide shows a similar situation caused by a different defect, referred to as an eventration, a weak spot in the diaphragm caused by defective musculature. The diaphragm forms a pouch and the contents of the peritoneal cavity extrude into this pouch. However, it is a pouch rather than a hole. Thus, the thoracic and peritoneal contents are misplaced, but are still separated by the diaphragm. That is the difference between eventration and CDH. The symptoms of diaphragmatic eventration present similarly to CDH. Question: defective formation and/or fusion of the pleuropericardial membranes separating the pericardial and pleural cavities is an uncommon congenital anomaly. This anomaly results in a blank defect of the blank, usually the left side. The answers are: this abnormality results in a congenital defect of the pericardium, usually on the left side. Consequently, the pericardial cavity communicates with the blank cavity. In very unusual cases, part of the blank atrium blank into the pleural cavity at each heartbeat. Consequently, the pericardial cavity communicates with the pleural cavity. In very unusual cases, part of the left atrium herniates into the pleural cavity at each heartbeat.